Well, hi everyone. I have a very, very interesting person with me today, Marius Poskus. Marius is the CISO of GlowFS, and we've got to know each other via a mutual friend that I've known for about 25 years, and we just hit it off instantly. And the question is why? And I think it's a set of values and thoughts in this industry which I think have become very, very important. We'll explore those and unpack them in just a minute, but it will be a very enjoyable session. But before I begin, Marius, do you want to give everyone a brief background as to where you come from and what you're doing and your CISO journey?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marius. So yes, as Dan mentioned, I'm a CISO at Glow Financial Services. A bit of a background. So I'm always been intrigued and always obviously wish to get into the CISO journey, but I was very methodical, I think, in my journey, and I really loved. So I started my career working in SOCs and building security operation centers, and then I moved into cloud security engineering and cloud architecture. I built an application security programs and DevSecOps frameworks for organizations. I've built penetration testing frameworks, and I've done my master's in digital forensics. And that's where I've wrote my master's dissertation around how we can build threat-informed security operations center. So the goal was always not to go the neck deep into one specific niche area of cybersecurity, but to cover the broad spectrum, to be comfortable on technical level on all of the, all of the areas within cybersecurity. And now I'm obviously reached the CISO level. I also run my company called MP Cybersecurity. I'm also running a YouTube channel at MP Cybersecurity. So guys, check it out. There's some various videos. There's also my dissertation split into the videos. Also checked out my LinkedIn. I'm always posting articles that are, I guess, thought-provoking, and hoping, to get some feedback and ideas and collaboration with like-minded people.
And that's where the inspiration of this particular interview came from, because you released around about a week and a half ago. We'll tag it in this particular write-up, Marius. But you wrote an article which is essentially the ethics of the way in which cybersecurity works. I really want to pull on that because it's something that I have experienced for many years, and I've been thinking about for many, many years, about the fact that cybersecurity is a trust industry. But in this industry, people do really self-centered things that aren't necessarily, not always, but not necessarily in the keeping of the spirit of looking after their client. And that might be in terms of stack, it might be in terms of service, and so on and so forth. It doesn't mean it's not valuable, but it's just the thinking behind this. So tell me, we're in a world of trust, but there's a skew in this trust here, isn't it? It's self-centered trust. Tell me your thoughts on this, because this was a really, really interesting article.
Yeah, I always find it very difficult because I understand that obviously in cybersecurity world, vendors are driven to make money.
Hmm.
But there is the right way to make money and there is a wrong way to make money. And the problem is when the pressure to get sales goes way past honesty, integrity, where we skew how this is worked. Because the problem is to get yes and a signature, salespeople tend to use various, we know psychological persuasion tactics and things like that. But that at the outset creates an imbalance. And that's why vendors normally, after 12 months, they've been ripped out and looked for replacement because they are over-promise and under-deliver. Whereas if you look at any other, relationship building sort of, journey that you would go on to, you always want to under-promise and over-deliver and create with honesty. I very rarely hear vendor to say, yes, our specific tool has problems and we are looking to address it, but we are amazing at this, that, and this. Normally it's, yes, we can do everything and we can solve all of your problems. And when the tool goes in, you are faced with a harsh reality that does not represent of what's been spoken at the outset. And that's where there is a lot a lot of problems. We all know the nowadays the coined phrase of snake oil, and there's too much of snake oil around the industry nowadays.
I totally agree with you. As everyone knows, I've been building businesses now for 23 plus years, I think it is. And it really has dawned on me, Marius, that your word, your intent, your ethic, and the way in which organizations are designed, it is now becoming actually a real differentiator, because if you have your clients' intent at your heart, then the opportunities to really partner with them and drive cybersecurity standards, and I'm not referring to compliance, I'm referring to quality here, up is so important. But this has longevity, because of these cycles, disappeared to a greater extent out of our industry, do you think?
In some sense, yes, because I think the problem is, and I see this a lot, cybersecurity itself is, from CISO perspective and from vendorship and sales perspective, when you look at the wrong metrics, your vision is being skewed. If you're chasing the bottom line on the next quarter of the targets, you are blinded with the next quarter. But as you all know now, it's a simple fact. If you do something mischievous to achieve the next signature, you probably can achieve, yes, sales for the contract for 12 months, but your outlook for the next 2-3 years can be skewed to the wrong side, and your reputation might make a big hit. People sometimes forget, and I'm, being on the other side of the CISO world, I have many, many networks where a lot of people are talking. So, one of my other articles, and I think this is very important to address, cybersecurity sales, cold calling, cold emailing are dead. There's a big thing nowadays happening, word of mouth, community engagement, providing expertise and shining the light of, you are an expert in that field, in that product vertical, and showcasing, your community support, how, people forget, you don't always even sell nowadays to the CISO. Sometimes CISO passes tool evaluation to its team. So how you can support the whole team, that's, I think, sometimes are, short-sighted by vendors. You need to think about a longer vision and a longer target, because, and also, if you make a good impression, if you have clients' needs at heart, word of mouth spreads, people love introducing great stuff and sharing great stuff with their peer networks. A great, influence will have a resounding, effect across the community, but the bad one will have the same effect. Bad sales tactics, bad approaches, bad marketing slogans, will have a big impact of how you are viewed as a company.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Late last year, I woke up, I don't know, have terribly many epiphanies in life, but I woke up with one about 3 a.m, and I then sort of journeyed off into my office to go and write this up and do something with it. And then I was searching, and just luck and a bit of happenstance came in there along, and I found a really, really interesting article on McKinsey & Co. And just taking some of their principles, extremely well-respected organization and something with great values at heart. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is just described the model that we also pursue. And then I obviously met you, and the same thing resonated, which is put your client at the heart and the center of your thinking and your world. Then do everything you can to absolutely nail the deliverables that you are doing there. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're trying to solve the problem. And that just pulls all this there through with it. And they also value longevity. They think in multiple year cycles rather than this quarter. And I've absolutely settled on the fact that this is a very rare thing now in our marketplace. Harder to do with SaaS, but still you can represent that with tools. But in consultancy, it's extremely important. And those values then, when you encode them, you rip away the problems. And now we start dealing with the true challenges of cyber. It's really complicated. And both of us go down the gym. You obviously are more successful than I am in that endeavor. But the point is, it's low and slow and iterative, isn't it? And that's where change comes. And the only way you can do that is if you're on a journey with your client. What are your thoughts around that, Marius? It's an extremely subtle and important field, isn't it?
Yes, it definitely is, and I think it's about you, as you say, it's about building values. It's about being consistent, and I think sometimes same as you. I like you doing some of the analogies, and as you say, gym. Why people normally fail in the gym? Because they go there for a week, they fail to see the changes, and they give up. And I think similar can happen in cybersecurity. It's important, and I always take now I think a few very important lessons is which kind of transcends, I think, client support, is empathy, is actually trying to get in someone else's shoes and understanding where they're coming from, because it's very easy sometimes to dismiss or to judge someone without understanding what they are facing. In cybersecurity, and the more I do it, the more I understand. Cybersecurity professionals like to be at the center of attention, but the problem is, security is not the ultimate thing. In the business, you have to make money, sometimes despite of cybersecurity issues. So it's about building relationships. It's about making people understand and make them see your cybersecurity issues, make them be able to make informed decisions and take risks, because ultimately, if you want to be successful in a business, you have to take risks, but you have to take calculated risks with all of the information at hand.
Amen to
And your
that.
goal is to be able to provide that to the leadership that you are serving, and making sure that you're trying to get away from hidden agendas. And smartest person in the room says you have to listen more to be able to respond, instead of I see a lot of people are very eager to jump and say something without actually understanding what the question is, where the angle is coming from. You have to absorb, you have to try and understand the problem before you can actually try and offer help.
So I've got three sets of questions now in line based on exactly what you said, but I'm fascinated. I know my views, obviously, around this, but I want you to unpack this for me if you can, Marius. Cybersecurity, you say individuals, practitioners like to be the center of attention. Wow, there's a statement, but how real is that? Tell me why.
um I've seen a number of times, obviously, we all know what happened with like the likes of Uber, with the likes of cybersecurity professionals that have been prosecuted with rightly or wrongly. But the thing I see now currently in industry is cybersecurity professionals are complaining because they're either not getting the budget they want, they are not either getting the seat at the table to the C-suite executive. But to me, and I truly believe that, to me, complaining is one thing, but for me, why these things are happening, or why you're not getting the seat at the table, why you're not getting the budget of is not because it's not the audience problem. I always say, if the message is not understood, is the speaker problem. It's not the audience problem. So actually understanding, and that's kind of, we circle back to the soft skills.
Mm.
I always say, even now when I mentor, junior people, I said, I don't care how great your technical ability is. Your idea will never reach a day of light unless you can convince and influence other people that your idea is amazing.
Mm.
And that's where, being a CISO, it's not only about, soft skills and talking, it's about, you have to be and build on skills of storytelling. How you can create a narrative and storytelling to your board and executives, that they understand A, what the problem is, and B, that your solution is the best solution, and that's what we should be going for. I built a cybersecurity executive charter to my team, which actually, on my C-suite, that actually says, how they are accountable for cybersecurity, but I'm responsible to deliver it. But what I need in that delivery cycle, they signed off for it. But the key point is, and people sometimes, they very usually forget this. Cybersecurity can be overridden as long as we follow a formal process, because at the end of the day, we are as I said, we're balancing risk to make sure that business can deliver to its bottom line. And this risk is obviously, it's not linear. I am in the business now, which we have a limited number of competitors. So therefore, we are making more risks to grab as much of the market as possible. When we reach a certain level of maturity, our risk taking might change because we are leaders in the market and we need to, consolidate.
Gosh, there's a lot to think about in that, but I've then got a leading question that goes on with this, and it's something you and I have discussed before, which is, you know how we were talking about longevity in suppliers to the likes of the CISO, but actually we can now look at the CISO as well. Longevity in CISOs and tenure in CISOs. CISO tenure tends to be quite short, doesn't it? And tell me about some of the observations that you've had in your own cohort and peer group, where you see CISOs come in and throw out entire stacks and establish systems, not necessarily for the right reasons. What's behind that? And tell me about that use case.
Yeah, I think one thing that sometimes is not probably talked a lot and it's not probably investigated a lot. We all know just from reading the statistics, the usual tenure of a CISO is about 18 months. And I think obviously CISOs have different views and ideas how they run their programs, but there is usually an affiliation with vendors or tools because what they've used before worked for them. But I think one thing is sometimes forgotten is that what works for one company might not necessarily work for another company because of different circumstances, different stack. But the problem is that CISOs, when they come in a new company, usually the first step is to rip out the tools that previous CISO had and employ the tools that they love. And the problem is with that, sometimes there is no consistency because the program every 18 months is going to be almost at the rebuilding stage. So it's lacking consistency, but B, and I think where sometimes this comes from is in security, sometimes we forget that not only you need to deploy the tools, but you need to measure its effectiveness and whether they working as they intend to be working. Because we always talk in security, people forget the basics, making sure you have asset register, because you have to make sure that you can defend what you have. And if you don't know what you have, you can't defend it. So starting with this, and then I'm really a big proponent now. And I think that just merging that, tactics, for example, from taking frameworks from software engineering, so something like chaos engineering, and actually employing that in your SOC, in your cybersecurity stack, where you can actually inject faults, inject problems, and try and detect and see how your environment are behaving. Because that's the key point. Sometimes we talk about certain, incidents, but you might not necessarily see them. So unless you test proactively, you're not going to know how your environment's going to behave.
That's a big one. That is a huge one. I don't know whether it's just, luck, a theme, bit of everything, but so many projects that we've run of late, and they're not sort of isolated projects, they're journeys with clients that sort of, you're in the gym with them. Things are not detecting us, not at all. They spend so much on amazing stacks, but then it generates secondary and tertiary problems as well, Marius, and that suddenly you've got all this data, so then their focus rather becomes on the tool and detecting and figuring things out. Now their problem becomes a data problem and a data lake problem, and becoming an analyst of all this kind of stuff and an integrator of many sources of data. And it's almost like people are in the ambition to see everything are seeing less and less and less because they're being pulled off stage rather than on stage because of these tools. And it kind of leads me into another question, which is, should we be trying to scan everything? Should we be trying to detect everything? Is that the right approach here as a CISO? Where do we draw a balance in this?
I definitely don't think it is because, and I kind of just mentioned a little bit, but, my master's dissertation that I wrote it's
Mm.
actually, I've done a lot of research in how you build a threat-informed security operations center. And that starts with honing in. So the first part of the build out is we ask the questions. What is your industry?
Yep.
What geographical presence do you have? And then we start doing research on threats or potential threat actors that would be relevant to you. And then you can map their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And all of these tactics then can be mapped to data points or logs. And you can actually do threat prescribed or informed data ingestion in your SOC. And then you obviously build analytics, you then substitute, and then you create a continuous improvement cycle of what's happening out with threat intelligence and while informs how your SOC can detect, but you're actually building only detection to the relevant threats that you're currently seeing in your industry, in your geography, or in your geographical presence. And then you keep iterating, and then you build a maturity where we can map MITRE attack to MITRE defend and elevate maturity of defending tactics. And then the next stage is being proactive and actually building canary tokens, building leeways where you can actually guide threat actors into specific traps where you can even get more threat intelligence information of what they would be using in your environment, which helps inform your defensive stack. So I think that's the key element is, I think people sometimes trying to boil the ocean. You need to be targeting in, you need to think of, because I always talk as well to people, when you go on a journey, for example, building a SOC,
Mm.
you need to think about your organization size and threat sophistication level you can target. Because being small and medium organization, you're never going to be able to defend against nation state threat actors because you're never going to get that type of budget. So at what threat sophistication level your defense stops and what you need to worry about in building out those defenses to make sure that, I always say, I really like coining this phrase, 2010s was all about reducing the likelihood of attack. I think this changed because we can't reduce the likelihood anymore. So 2020s is about reducing the impact. So how we can maintain business operations while adverse things are happening in our environment. And that's how you should be targeting and building defenses moving forward.
That is a really fabulous example. How do we reduce the impact? Because one thing that concerns me greatly is it's become a bit of a thing and a bit of a theme, which is detect, respond. But
Yeah.
what never gets mentioned in that narrative is if you are detecting and you are responding and there is a compromise, then your PII or your client data may or may not be gone or compromised. And then you've got the regulator on your back and the law and all those other compounding important issues and share price and clients leaving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's become almost trendy, hasn't it, to detect, respond. We're going to be breached, which is known breach scenario, so detect, respond. It's pretty flawed, isn't it, when you think like that? I had a client the other day that said to me, I don't accept that. We do not want to be breached. End of subject. What an interesting, and I thought, why should that be such a statement? It's kind of alarming, isn't it? Tell me your thoughts around
Yeah,
that.
I think sometimes people, obviously because of the cybersecurity complexity, people
Yes.
sometimes are resigned to the fact that, there's too many. I think it's FUD in the industry, which vendors sometimes are creating, saying,
Right.
there's always that they saying that, it's not about when you're going to be breached. It's not it's not about if you're going to get breached. It's about when. And that fear mongering leads to sometimes, again, to the sales and buying the tools because they saying that it's inevitable you're going to get breached and our tool is going to prevent you from getting breached. Like that's going to be end of all of your problems.
So that narrative, Marius, is now being adopted by people's own thinking because they hear so much of it. It then becomes part of, not say all of it, but a degree of your thinking. It becomes the language of the industry because it's been peddled out there. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because I've kind of observed in the last year or two that so many clients have almost been, I had a little theory, have almost been trained by the industry about how to buy this stuff, and don't necessarily think laterally and uniquely and say, well, what is it I'm trying to achieve? And does this match that gap? It's almost the other way around. It becomes such a push, and it's
Yeah,
good, is it?
yeah. I think obviously when you hear it very often, you start to assimilate to it. And the one thing I always find problematic, and I think it kind of goes back to the article. I think there's so many organizations I see are if you see the trends over the last few years, the cybersecurity budget spending are increasing, but breaches are increasing at the same time. So one would think, should we need a different tactic because we keep spending more money, but the breaches are keep happening. And that's where my thinking is always, you can't outspend the breaches or problems because people are spending more money to do more firefighting, actually trying to solve more incidents, trying to fix more vulnerabilities without actually understanding why they happen in the first place. And that's the key problem for me in cybersecurity. Sometimes it's too much thought about being it a technical problem. Cybersecurity now becomes encompassing all of our different departments, from HR to finance. Everyone's using technology,
Yes.
and how we can solve those problems with technology, it has to be thought about improving business processes. I always say to people as well sometimes, oh, we can't get cybersecurity buy-in from other departments. And I always coin this phrase, you have to make sure, and that's again how you create the narrative. Security becomes part of the quality metric. And in order to every business unit provide quality, security is built in as a metric. And I always say, oh, but for example, finance don't want to, they don't want to be responsible for security because they say we're going to come and solve their problems. And I really love, this phrase really makes a difference talking with business units. I always ask a simple question to the people. When you left your house this morning, who locked the front door? Did you did or someone else did? You did. So therefore, finance are responsible for their own security. I am, as a CISO, and my team can give you the tools and can guide you and can help you to solve your security problems, but you are responsible and you are owning the risk of cybersecurity in your department.
There is a topic of another big debate, isn't it? Which is whether the CISO is responsible for security or whether it's the organizations. But that's one for another debate. I think we'll do that another time. My final question really is going back to the tenure point of CISOs and also the use of tools and changing things all the time. Do you think we're suffering from a lack of the letting compounding and consolidation really getting in? If you're only there for a short period of time, or if your colleagues, because of cybersecurity, are always moving around, great because you learn a lot, but bad because you lose that compression of cycles of getting better. And also, I'm thinking now you mentioned the people in the process side, you lose the relationships that kind of go to your previous point about ownership. So briefly, share with me your thoughts around that compounding consolidation cycle. Are we losing that?
I think it's sometimes yes. I think sometimes people forget, or it's not talked about because I think the technology is advancing so fast. I'm always been a big fan of Sunil's cyber defense matrix, because when you're building your defenses, you have to make sure that you addressing specific areas, and overlapping tools, it's pointless. You need to make sure how it fits in, first of all. I always say to people, the problems nowadays sometimes as well is you can add so many tools. But if I always say to my team, if I need to add another dashboard into the stack that my team needs to see, if there's 10 dashboards, it becomes very cumbersome in managing that, our defenses. So usually you have to pick sort of one sort of truth, and normally it should be your SIEM. So integratability within your SIEM and all of the stack within your defenses as one source of truth becomes key. Because, I always ask, the key question, sometimes I think people as well forget, any tool that you think is a consolidation. So if you're buying a new tool, you're trying to replace at least, one other or two another, not to add. And then it's a great in integration into your stack. Another thing is obviously workflows. So whether it's Jira, Azure DevOps, and all of the tools, how it's integrated, how it's, automated. Because you want to be in a position where you can actually, move it to a level where it becomes easy to manage the workflow. It becomes easy to gain visibility, and it becomes easy for your team to get the best out of it. The one thing I think sometimes, which vendors are sometimes forgetting as well, and there's very key point. If your tool, I always say when I'm, for example, interviewing a vendor or I'm trying to find a specific fix for a specific solution, one of the main key questions I'll say is, what's your time to optimal performance? And what does it take to reach that? If they say to me, oh, it takes about 3 months and I need one engineer full time, I can't afford to spend 3 months of my engineer full time configuring this tool to reach optimum value to my company. That's nonsense. And sometimes people forget that's your value as a vendor as well. Having a prescriptive or having even people who can guide and reach optimal levels that the tool operates in my platform.
I agree with you. You always know when you've made a really, really great point, you enter page 2 of my pad, not page 1. And that's definitely gone on there. That's a very, very important point. It goes to a principle that I see not used, which is the principle of subtraction, taking things away. And I love this phrase as well, Marius, which is simple is not easy. It really is. It's so much easier to go and acquire things rather than subtract and make things simple. Super points, so very interesting. I can't wait to see the write-up on this particular discussion as well. But I think for the moment, we'll have to leave it there. Marius Boskus, thank you very much, CISO of Glow Financial Services, and such a very, very interesting take on the challenges of CISO. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure.